In December 2016, the Modi government put out a revised drought manual that fundamentally changes the way in which drought is assessed, in which crop assessment in drought situations is done, and significantly reduces the powers and initiative of state governments in the process of drought assessment. Now, this is important because drought is not a national phenomenon. It tends to be a regionalized, sub-regional phenomenon. And state governments should be more prominent in the assessment of drought. One of the 2016 revised manual does several things that change the game entirely. One, it seems to me that there is a complete delinking of crop assessment and drought assessment, which means that the crop assessment is done in an entirely different way, and the assessment of drought, whether there is or not a drought and how serious it is done in a completely different way, and the two are no longer linked seriously. Most of the assessment is going to be done on the basis of satellite data, and satellite data aggregated, as far as I can see, at the taluka level. Now, you're going, the old method, if you look at where the crop assessment falls below 50%, you've got a problem. Now, when you're looking at taluka level data, you are submerging maybe scores of villages that have a very serious problem, but where the taluka level average works out better. Earlier, you did crop experiments, assessments at the village level to find out what was called anevari or paisevari, less than 50% yield expected and things like that. That's not going to matter much more now. It's going to be done, you're going to aggregate data from satellites at the taluka level. It's not going to be a village level exercise. Further, it reduces the importance of assessments like level of water in the tanks and reservoirs and in the rivers and in the lakes. You're going to look at while they create a number of indicators, you're largely going to be looking at two things called normalized difference vegetation index and normalized difference wetness index. And on the basis of this, you're going to declare whether in that taluka there is sufficient evidence of drought. Now, this is really going to damage people who are in many talukas, but who are not coming under the drought criteria. Maharashtra, for instance, declared very recently 151 talukas out of its 358 as drought affected. However, the actual number of talukas affected is far more. It's well over 200. If you go by the old methods of calculating, it's well over 200. So first, they've reduced the number of areas which should come under a declared drought. Second, even the Maharashtra government's declaration makes it clear that this declaration is based on the criterion of the central government. So if you're going to look at taluka level data, you're going to aggregate it at the taluka level, then the era of village-wise drought assessment is over. And what's going to happen is that it substantially reduces the power of state governments to declare drought, to make a study and declare drought. They are going to, in fact, it sort of completely concentrates that power in central hands. Even though formal declarations will come from state governments, they've got to be based strictly on the central criteria. In real terms, while the state government might make announcements, the center has withdrawn the right of the states to declare drought in practice. The entire system by which we looked at drought, assessed drought, looked at distress in agricultural sectors, those have been now given a go by in a report where it's buried under huge amounts of jargon and technical language. But essentially, you have you've made it much more difficult for people hit by drought to draw attention to their issues. And even if a state government, a local department of the government is saying there is a severe drought in these villages, that's not going to count. That's not going to count. It's going to be subsumed in the taluka level data. And there's another problem. When you're doing things when you are depending mainly on the satellite data, there's a very significant departure from the past. In many droughts in India, like the ones you've had repeatedly in Marathwada, this is the third drought we are seeing in Maharashtra in 5 years. Okay? But when you've had drought, what is the most common phenomenon for farmers? The crop fails, they do a second sowing. Sometimes farmers in Nashik, Marathwada and Vidarbha have been known to do third sowings. Now, all that is normally taken into account in distress and in compensation. Now, satellite data is not going to take into account a second sowing and a third sowing. It doesn't know what that is. It's not going to take that into account at all. So the compensation is the drought declaration, the drought assessment, and the process on a platform on which compensation will be given is completely alienated from the farmer, the field, and actual life. I think the 2016 December drought manual is a game changer for the worse.